Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Schlage number AL10S Jupiter 613. This video is going to be an overview of the contents of the box, what this passage set is, what the AL series is. We'll look at the product catalog, we'll look at installation instructions, we'll look at a cut sheet, a template, things of that nature. So let's start with an overview of what's actually in the box. Okay, this is just, one variant or derivative of their AL series. Well, starting right at the top, template. Warranty statement is here. Installation instructions, we're going to go over those. Screw package, and that's how I can tell how complicated these locks are. And this will, when I see extra screws, I say, okay, there's more than one step here. This has exactly the quantity that I'd like to see. It has two more than needed, and that's because this screw pack will include 2 screws for a strike that you're not going to need. It includes 4 screws for a strike so that they can have one screw package, whether you pick an ANSI strike or a full lip or a D strike or a T strike. This is a Castle nut wrench. This is made of plastic. These used to be made of steel. So they're plastic now, and you are going to need one of those. It's hard to take the lock off the door or put it on without. This lock is specified with an ANSI 4 7/8 strike. In no particular order, this is the latch bolt. This is a privacy set. Pardon me, this is a passage set. So there's just a spring latch here. And this is the 11-116 part of the part number. We'll go over that as well. By the way, the strike is the 10-025 part of the part number. We'll go over why that is. Has your inside rose. And then, of course, the business end of the entire affair. That would be the passage set itself. That finish looks a little bit 10R to me. US 10R looks a little bit more of a oxidized, relieved. But this is 613. Every time you get 613, it's going to look different. Is literally the intent of the definition of oil rubbed bronze. 613. It's called a living finish. It will not only change with time, but every batch that you get from every manufacturer is going to look different. The batches from the same manufacturer are also going to look different as well. And we do need to be cautious when we specify oil rubbed bronze to make sure that the client, the end user, the person paying the bill, or the designer, the architect, whomever, the contractor, the person responsible understands what oil rubbed bronze is. Because oil rubbed bronze is a process, a chemical process that's done over a particular architectural base material, bronze. And that process is inherently and by definition unstable. It's meant to be unstable. It's meant to evolve and change with time. If you look at hardware that is installed as oil rubbed bronze, there's a restaurant here in town that I go to, once a month or whatever it is. And they have long ladder poles on the outside. They're oil rubbed bronze. They're true oil rubbed bronze. Exterior, Florida, coastal environment. And the doors are 8 foot. These poles are probably 6 foot. And it's all oil rubbed bronze, and it looks really nice. The area where especially the right-hand reverse door, that area where we go up and touch the door, that's all worn off of the oil rubbed, revealing the golden bronze tones underneath. And some people will say, why did my finish wear off? Some people will say, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to have happen. So pick, how you want it to turn out, but true oil rubbed bronze is going to wear off with time. If I were to take my hand and run it over this, there's going to be a mark left, and that's part of the finishing process. The fact that this looks wet, okay, it glistens a little bit more than a lock really would. It's because it's not completely dry. and it will wear down with time. This country club where this is going, we've had a conversation about, this exactly, this exact concern. Do you want that finish to wear off with time? Because the existing hardware was all doing that. It was 10 years old, and all the pull handles were worn down, and everything. And it was decided that the client did not want a living finish like this. And what we did was an oil rub bronze equivalent on all the pull hardware. So it's a powder-coated dark bronze color over a stainless base material. Those pull handles are all going to stay that dark brown type oil rubbed complementary finish. These pull handles were not available at that time in that option, so 613 is what is being used. All right, let's continue on with this conversation. And what we'll do at this point is we will phase into a screen view so we can look at the different supporting documentations of this lock. Let's do so now. This is the item that we're looking at here, the AL10S. Not much to see here, so let's skip right over to the product brochure. Link to the manufacturer's page is here, and we'll get back to that at the end. So this is our product brochure, and this is an overview, obviously, of the AL series locks. So, this is a great resource that everyone would use, whether you're someone who's looking to just buy a lever, a very good quality grade 2 lever lock, or if you're an industry professional like myself who needs to refer to, anything particular about the lock. A question might be, will it work on a door that's, 1.5 inches thick? So, yeah, I would go right to this catalog and refresh my memory. I may happen to have the answer memorized, but if I don't, then this is where I would go as well. An overview of the assembly of the lock, and I can tell you that it's a fairly common lock in the sense of how it is put together, how it's manufactured, how it assembles on the door, and shares many commonalities with all other grade 2 lever locks, most certainly, and grade 1 is the similar concept as well. And those shared concepts would be the through bolt. You're always going to have a through bolt through the door for levers. Now there are some manufacturers who will not require that those be installed, and that they're actually optional. They can be removed if you so see fit to do so. Because they will install without those. As far as I know, those are exclusively imported locks, Asian imported locks. I'm not aware of any domestic locks that's optional. But the truth of the matter is you would absolutely not want to forego even if you had the option, forego the through bolt mounting, because with the rotational force that you can put on a lever, you can really get this chassis to move, okay? And that's going to stress the connection between the back of the latch bolt and the retracting hub that's here. And if you don't have those lever through bolts, you can guarantee a failure of operation of the lock. It's also going to be, of course, common in the fact that the design is simple and straightforward. In best designs, as I had said earlier, there's 2 screws for the latch. Well, what I'm expanding on now is there's 2 screws for the latch, 2 for the strike, and then just two for the lock itself. And that's simple and straightforward. They'll all have a way to adjust for door thickness, and keeping that super simple and straightforward is a hallmark of a good lock design, and we'll study how to adjust this door thickness as well. So the AL series originally had just the Jupiter, Neptune, and Saturn, of course, with the Saturn being the overwhelming most common design, not by, I think maybe by default, because the initial early ADA designs were literally these sort of brutalist type, just straight lever, hard angular, heavy return back to within 1/2 inch of the face of the door. A lot of people didn't like Neptune, or the Quantum by Falcon lever, or the the ND series has they have a heavy return like this as well. The name is escaping me right now. The Jupiter is fairly common, a relatively straight lever with a gentle return. The Omega is really different from the Neptune in that its shape here is certainly far more curved, and you've got a different rosette that's here. That's a newer design, although it's been around for quite a long time. We don't certainly see a lot of it sold. You can do knurling or tactile warning on the back of the material. This would be knurling or tactile warning would be literally grooving that's been done in the back side of the lever, and that's going to be used when you are dealing with a situation where you need to indicate to those that are visually handicapped to be aware or to not go in that door. You'd very commonly see that in electrical closets in a condo building. Also, in certain code, you're going to see the requirement of tactile warning in stairwell doors as well. So be mindful of that. A deep dive into the code would reveal a requirement of tactile warning. I believe that it would also be perfectly acceptable to have an adhesive-backed, applied material with an abrasive coating on it. Think of a self-adhesive coarse sandpaper. That's just what it is. And that product is also used on thresholds occasionally as well. Lots of different finishes they can do, and thankfully the world of available finishes and locks has continued to expand. And what I in particular mean, you could always, of course, get the typical culprits, your 626 satin chrome, 605 and 613. But they're making these locks available in the other somewhat less common finishes like 612, but 606 and 609, satin brass, antique brass. 619, 25 years ago they weren't offering this lock in satin nickel, but the market wants satin nickel. The market also wants black. That's a far more recent development in our industry, that black is a very popular finish. 643E aged bronze, that is going to be a lighter, more possibly agreeable version of oil rubbed bronze, in that it will have a lighter tone to it, and plus it will have relief on some of the finish, on some of the parts. This antimicrobial coating, that is a great idea, because an antimicrobial coating is literally that. It will retard the growth of bacteria on surfaces, and you will see that as standard practice in places like hospitals, not only on trim for locks, but push and pull latches and push and pull hardware as well. Okay, that's nice when you see a chart like this where all of it's available. Every lever is available in every finish. They do have an asterisk. Okay, so they don't want to do 609 in full size or small format interchangeable core. Right on, got it. The 643, back to that is an Allegion proprietary finish. There's not going to be anyone else's material that will match that exactly, but if you're staying under the Allegion umbrella for your hardware, and that, those companies would be Schlage and LCN and Von Duprin, Glenn Johnson, Ives, Zero, Falcon, Doromatic, and others that I'm forgetting. You may be able to get 643E across those different product lines. The handing of the door, while that's nice to know, I don't think anything in this line is handed whatsoever. These levers are symmetrical, they're not handed. It's, of course, best practice to indicate the handing when you're ordering something, but I don't think it's going to matter on this lock at all. I can't think of a reason why it will. They are all the levers ADA compliant, and that is because they return back to within 1/2 of an inch of the face of the door. The dimension from here to the back of the lever is the overwhelming, sort of, concept of that. A deep dive into the ADA design guide is going to talk more about that. So this is a grade 2 lock, which means it's been tested to 500,000 cycles. That doesn't mean that on the 500,000 in first cycle the lock fails. It's just been tested to that. Who knows what the lock would actually stop, or where a part would break at it. It's I wouldn't be shocked if someone said 3 million. If it's used in an adult setting, that lock's going to last for decades. They talk about different functions here. They're stuffing all of that into these drawings. A blank plate, a key with a fixed or active lever, a push turn button, a push button on this side, deadlocking, spring latch designs, and they start with their functions now. A 10 function is an F75 as a passage set. The ANSI F75 means that you could look at any lock manufacturer's catalog, and if you see an F75 there, it will be the identical function in any other lock manufacturer's product catalog. So an F75 from Falcon is a passage set exactly matching these requirements. An F75 from Schlage is a passage set exactly matching these requirements. But not only for sister companies, but for Sargent and Yale and imported locks, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Now we get into other functions here, and that blank plate they mentioned earlier is called an exit lock, and that would be a AL25, a D, because it'll have a deadlocking latch bolt rather than a spring latch. We'll talk about that in a moment. If you wanted nothing other than a lever on one side and a blank plate on the other, this would be your lock. Some people want a key in that lever and then a blank plate on the other side. That's available, just not in the AL series. You'd have to go to the ND series for that function. 40 is a privacy. 44 is a little bit of a variant on that. Unlock from outside by turning emergency turn button. So the exterior of that lock is going to have a turn button on a privacy. So you don't need a flat-bladed instrument like a screwdriver or a tool. You just need to turn the button, and that would be appropriate if you have a hospital application or a clinical application where it is possible that staff will have to get into that door without any special tool, and for all intents purposes, no special knowledge. Turn inside lever to close door. Sure. So a variant of the privacy. That is taking us to a single dummy, an AL170. A 50 function is an office function, just a push button on the inside. That can be ordered as either retaining or non-retaining, and that means that you ought to be able to, and by the way, these symbols that they're showing here, conventional cylinder, this is available with a conventional cylinder with a small format interchangeable core, which was patented by Frank Best, founder of the Best Company in about 1921 or so. And then the full-size interchangeable core, small format, Best Falcon Arrow and all of the clones. And full-size, also known as large format. Schlage calls it full-size, and that is just a marketing angle to contend against small format. The logic is, what would you rather have, small format or full size? So same functionality, just marketing. And of course, it's dimensionally different. So back to the retaining, non-retaining. On an office function, if you were to go inside of the office or the room and push the button, the outside is rigid. You can only get in with a key at that point. If I were to rotate the lever and exit and pull the door closed, it's unlocked now. Now it's a passage set. But if I were in the door, if I was in the room, rotated the lever, the button will pop out. If I were to push the button back in and then pull the door closed, you want to be sure that that button is either going to stay locked or it's going to be unlocked, and that's retaining and non-retaining. So you have to be mindful that that actually can be ordered that way, but the function is such that it will be retaining in the sense that it will stay locked. That does not work for some people. AL53 is of course the common triple function lock, and when I say triple function, it can act as a passage set, it can act as an office function, and it can act as a storeroom lock, depending on how you control the inside push turn button. Most common function, I think, out there. The 53 function did not exist in the 1970s. they had other functions that they had like 2 or 3 functions Schlage did that when you put them together, they were kind of an entry lock, but they were actually different lock sets themselves. So you had to pick a lane. And the manufacturer's link here that I had referred to earlier, you can pull up archival Schlage catalogs. Here I happen to have a 1972 and a 1979 and a 1982 catalog here, just for fun. But at some point, I don't know when, in the 70s or 80s, the 53 function was born. The 70 function is a classroom that can either be locked all the time or unlocked all the time, and it's controlled via the key. The storeroom lock is always locked on the outside, always unlocked on the inside. Then the 85 is going to give you the ability to have an occupancy indicator happening on that lock. And the way that that's going to work is there is going to be in the face of the cylinder, and as a throwback to hotel sort of cylinders, there's going to be literally a little metal round pin that's going to project out that is going to give the visual indication that it's occupied and that only the emergency key will be able to activate that lock. They call it emergency master key. The emergency key is so back in hotels before electronic locks took over, which was, not too terribly that long ago, but I don't remember the last time that I was in a hotel that I was issued a physical key. If you were in a hotel and you threw the privacy, you would literally project from the face of the cylinder in Schlage's system a pin, and that ultimately that pin disallowed other copies of that same key from working because the key could not rotate far enough to be able to unlock the lock. However, the emergency key or the manager's key or the room keeper's key or the maid staff key, whatever you want to call that, has a provision on it where it will allow the internal componentry of the cylinder to operate differently so that you can not bypass the lockout function, but fully operate the lock to be able to get in. So that, when they say that there is a visual occupancy indicator, it's not like in a, airplane where you can see red or green or whatever. It's quite nondescript, and unless you know what it looks like, you would not know how that works until it was pointed out to you, in my opinion. So those are the functions. So not a lot of functions in the AL series, and that's pretty typical. But what's nice is if you take the 40 or the 50 or the 53 and you go to the ND series or you go to the A series, you look at different series, those numbers are going to carry across. So if you're looking for a 50 function, an F82 function in their grade 1, it'll be an ND 50 is what it'll be. They talk about cylinders and keying here. Schlage has a very comprehensive offering of what would be classified as high security cylinders. The bottom line is they will have their Everest 29 system that has a check pin involved. Certainly an upgrade to standard pin tumbler cylinders, which would be the classic cylinders here. This check pin in the Everest 29 is an advantage because there's an element within the cylinder that has to be satisfied before the key will turn. Then you get into restricted versions of this where the keyways and the key blanks are certainly restricted, and you don't have immediate access to that material. Then you can get into the Primus XP, which has finger pins or a side bit milling, and the Everest has a side bit milling as well. It is a undercut side bit milling. It's a little bit different than the Primus side bit milling. So now you have 6 pins at the top and then 5 finger pins, if they still call them finger pins. They did when Schlage originally brought out the Primus in the very late 80s. I first saw it in the very early 90s physically in my hand, and taught myself how to take it apart and taught myself how it worked. The XP is a upgrade or an evolution, a patent evolution to the Primus system, where now you have to satisfy a left, right, and center orientation on your pins before the sidebar. And that's the thing, there's a sidebar in the Primus system. Then there's the Primus Restricted, which they're both restricted, but you're going to get into keyways that will be for different platforms, such as interchangeable core or small format. We'll get into different derivatives of the high security cylinders. They also have an SL option, which is an incredibly interesting evolution of their cylinder construction, SL, and it uses the depths and spacing that you would see in a best A2 system, and you can also it's a driverless system, so getting a little deep into the locksmithing terminology. There are no driver pins. There are hollowed out L pins, I think they call them, and you can then take that SL cylinder and add an XP component to it, where now there are 2 sidebars. The Primus has a sidebar, the SL has a sidebar, and pretty fascinating stuff. And then on much of the system, you can order it UL437, which is an upgrade in terms of the resistance that the cylinder will possess to attack, drilling, picking, wrenching, torching, not literally torching, but all sorts of stress tests that are literally defined in the Underwriters Laboratory 437 publication, which is not available. I don't believe you're just going to find it online. Someone may have it copied online, but that's a document that you pay for from UL 437. Not to go too deep into the woods, but I will stop there about their high security cylinders. The world of high security cylinders is an incredibly deep and rich category to dive into, and the more you look, the more you'll find, and the more you look, the more incredibly ingenious, brilliant minds at work when they're devising different ways for cylinders to work. I think it may be the opinion that Schlage is middle of the road high security, and that if you talk about high security, the question becomes is what component of high security are we talking about? Are we talking about pick resistance? Are we talking about impressioning resistance or bump resistance? Or are you talking about the ability of controlling key blanks? And really, I think the heart of the matter is, and the way that Medico approaches high security cylinders, is that if you can't get your hand on the key blank, there's not a lot you can do with the cylinder. And I think that's really everything that they talk about. I think that's it in a nutshell. You can certainly, restricted key blanks are not readily available from Schlage. You have to be who is on file to get those key blanks. So, moving forward in terms of high security, it will be the ability to not 3D print a key, and either making it so geometrically difficult that it's not possible to 3D print a key, or having elements in a key such as magnets or active elements. If you were to think of an active element, would be the DOM IX10, where there's a ball that can move. Multilock has it. Others do as well. But an active element in a key, you're not going to be able to 3D print, at least not currently. I have seen Schlage Primus keys 3D printed. It's a scanner and it's a printer. So that is something that they need to be concerned with naturally. Medico as well. All of them, in fact. I think a 3D key that might prove to be not simple to 3D print, and I am not an expert at all, would be the Abloy Protec key, or the Protec 2, and any key with an active element. The DOM stuff with an active element, or the as I had said earlier, multi-lock has an active element, and certainly many others. I'm far from an expert. So here's that SL cylinder I talked about. I did not know it was in here. It's a cool little thing. Very cool. It has a sidebar, no drivers. When you insert that key, you can't see it, but down in here is what's going to ride on the cuts of the key. And when those pins are lifted to the right height, this heavier groove that you see here, or here, these L pins have 2 grooves. They can also come available with 1. You would need 2 when you're master keying. When the L pins are raised to the right height and you turn the key or attempt to turn it, if the sidebar can enter the grooves, meaning the grooves are aligned with the sidebar, this would be called a gate, and the sidebar would have a fence, and when the fence can go in the gate, I know that's odd, but when the fence can go in the gate, the sidebar will, through rotational force as you're turning the key, will seat into those gates and allow you to turn the cylinder. Pretty cool stuff. Listen, this is not your grandparents' Schlage lock anymore with these high security cylinders. Those days are long gone. You can still do the classic, Schlage 7 or 7 keyways, your C, your E, C, E, F, E, F, G, F, G. Those days are long gone. Your standard commercial cylinders, unless you ask for Schlage C, is not going to come with that. They can do small format in this material. The homogenization of our industry has been exceptional in the last so many years, meaning I can order Schlage locks to take best cores, and I can order best locks to take Schlage cores. I think they're doing that because they need to. And all these lock manufacturers need to be able to do as much as possible to hang on to or to garner as much market share as possible. And if Schlage was given the opportunity of selling locks or not selling locks, I think they would take selling locks. And if I think the opportunity was, well, Schlage, I like your locks very much, but we have a best system here, and we have since 1967. But we do want to go to the Schlage lock. I think Schlage would rather sell locks without cylinders, prep for best cores, than not sell locks. And I would imagine that that's the point of this homogenization, regardless of who you speak about, whether it be Kaba Gemini or ASA or Abloy or Medico, Sargent, Yale, Schlage, Falcon. There's tremendous cross-pollinization that has occurred, and that gives the end user, the owner, the ability to make his or her decision up to say, I want this lock and I want this technology of cylinder. And it's great if you love the Schlage, if you like the Schlage product, but you don't feel that their cylinder technology is up to par, and you use Medico. Great. Medico is going to have cylinders to go on these Schlage locks. That's a guarantee. This is their full size. That's what their full size cylinder looks like. Now the latches and the strikes will be on the next page. So these latches you can do. What's really great about the AL series is they have you covered. And what I mean by that is, well, I think they have you covered. Do they? Let's take a look. No, they don't have you covered. So what I mean is they don't have a 3/4 projection latch bolt. So they have 2 3/8, 2 3/4, 3 3/4, and 5-inch back set. The 5-inch takes a link, and I think that, yeah, that's going to go with a 2 3/8 latch bolt. They have square corner, radius corner, and drive-in face. They're all 1/2-inch throw, meaning the projection of the latch bolt is 1/2 inch, but they don't have one that's 3/4, and you will definitely bump into 3/4 projection required latches on certain doors, especially pairs of doors. So look at the label on your the fire tag on your door. If it says 3/4 min latch throw, AL is not an option for you at all. I would imagine they have it in the D series. I won't divert into the D series catalog, but be mindful, they don't have you covered there. 1 inch wide, 1 1/8 wide can be done on these items as well. The common is going to be the 11096, which is here. inch and an eighth by 2 1/4 deadlocking latch. You know, that's going to be 11096 by 10025, and that is the ANSI strike that's here, 4 7/8 tall. Unless you specify, that's going to be what you get. I have a client that has us do 11088s, which is a 2 3/8 radius corner dead latch, and then LLL, which means less strike. Ultimately, it means less strike. So that's what they, you know, they order 100 at a time of an AL53 Saturn 11088 and less strike, and then we key them for them. Rabbited kit, if you are dealing with doors built in 1840, it could very likely have a rabbited door edge or colonial style, very likely rabbited edge. Or if you want to be the cool kid on the block, I would recommend pairs of doors to have a rabbited edge. And a rabbited edge is really nice because we are in either a single door or a pair of doors. A rabbited edge is really cool because you're really effectively blocking line of sight through here. So whether this is a pair of doors, okay, or it's a single door, and the frame is going to look like this, it's really a cool little situation you have going here, okay? Does a great job at sealing as well. Well, that latch bolt is going to reside in this space here, right? And you need a piece of hardware to trim off that exposed face of your latch and your strike for that matter, and that's what the rabbited kits do. That's all that they do. Ordering instructions. This is the most important aspect of every product catalog. What the factory wants you to tell them, and in the order in which they want you to give it to them. At the end of the day, if you get the wrong lock, the factory will hang their hat on the hook of, it's in our catalog, okay? We've defined how we want to see this stuff, you know, what they're considering standard as well. So, you know, every manufacturer ought to have an ordering instruction. Some manufacturers have a good ordering instruction, a reasonable one like this, but they force you to do the work of flipping back. Okay, the latch column, what do I want to put? What's 11096? You got to go back and look at the table. Then there are other manufacturers who will make the ordering instructions into an epic page and give you almost all of the options there in a very brief description. And if you need more information than you flip to the page, Dorma does an exceptional job at that. I like Dorma the best because they have a lot of options, and I would rather not have to flip through a catalog when I don't have to. Just tell me the part number for 2 3/4 latch bolt. I don't want to flip back. Is it 11096 2 3/4? I don't know. I happen to know that it is, but it's only because I've been selling that latch for 30 years. And that will then get you to the specifications. This is very nice to review because it's a one-page document that says, okay, this is a summary of our lock. Unlike this video, it's concise. And it will tell you what you're dealing with. What's the envelope of the lock? I just did a job for a client that he had 2-inch thick gates. Actually, the gates were 2 3/4 thick, but what they had to do was to go with a straight lever. I think we went with Jupiter, and then he took a router bit or a Forstner bit and drilled the face of the door. He counterbored it to the point where, well, maybe not counterboring it, but perhaps counterboring it, so that the effective thickness was 2-inch, but the gate was 2 3/4. So he mortised or routed in 3/8 on either side, because ordering an AL lock for a 2 3/4 inch thick door is going to be a difficult proposition and expensive one, and you're not going to get it in an AL lock, I believe. I think it'll have to be an ND lock. So now you're talking several hundreds of dollars. So the straight lever was because we were bringing that lock 3/8 of an inch closer to the face of the door. They talk about latches. They talk about the front of the locks, the chassis construction, steel, zinc dichromate, which will, you know, if you see a lock that, you know, parts that are steel but have a goldish sort of color to them, that's zinc dichromate. You'll see inexpensive residential hinges, zinc dichromated. half-inch latch throw. So they're telling you right there, half-inch latch throw. That's what we've got. The educated observer would say, well, they don't have 3/4 latch throw because you bump into that. And then the rest of the details. Now, back up in the functions, they had a PD here. They have an S over here. S means spring latch. That's for a non-keyed function. But when you get into the keyed functions, they have these codes. And used to be less codes than they are now, that's for sure. But nonetheless, you do need to refer to those codes every once in a while because you might need a B, which is a small format prep without a core, or you might need an R, which is a full size with the cylinder included. P is most common. Okay, D is dead latch, S is spring latch. Spring latch will always be on non-keyed functions. Dead latch will always be on keyed functions. It's technically not permissible to install them either which way. You can install a dead latch on a passage set if you wanted to. I don't see why you would. And if it's a fire-rated door, don't cross parts over. Install it as the installation instructions indicate, or technically you don't have a fire-rated door. So let's move on now to the service manual, and this won't take very long. So now the service manual that's linked to down below is, we're not going to dissect this part number, but just to make you aware of the fact that it exists, and should you have a long-term need to maintain, service, repair, bring back into full operational condition of your AL lock, this is the document by which you will be able to determine part numbers to do so. I had said part number 21. I think they call it the slide. I always call it the retracting hub in error. And we look at part number 21 or 22. So they have restoring and non-restoring, and the functions that they are available in are listed here as well. We were talking about those, those buttons staying popped out or not popping out, and that's where that reference is to. But the service manual anyway will show you all of the different parts. You might need just an outside lever or whatever the case might be. This document's going to get you there. All of the different parts. And the tables will also show you, here's a better table. It will show you the part number. It will show you the function that it applies to. And if the number 2 is there, that means you need 2 of them for the lock. Okay? It's not only appropriate for the lock or compatible, you would require 2 each of them to work like you would for this rosette. This part number 3. Part 3 for an AL85 is the rose. AL85, indeed, 2 each are required. Okay. Looking further into it, different cylinders are called out. This is obviously an older document, 1997. I don't believe the design has changed whatsoever. They have a reference to a hotel cylinder here as well, and that might be what they use on the 85 function. We were talking about that hotel cylinder function earlier. They don't list a cylinder for the 85 function. But my guess is it is the 21-021, and that is what that visual indicator looks like. What I'm saying is they don't list any other cylinder for that, and I know that the visual control, the visual part of the 85 function is that pin, so it must be the hotel cylinder. Other options, etc., you can keep looking through this material. Very interesting. Okay. Keyways are talked about here. I won't dive into it, but that's a neat little conversation on a multiplex key system that's there. That is your emergency key for the 85 function. I may not be accurate in it using a hotel cylinder. I'll leave that for a curiosity for another day. Discussion on how to actually service the unit, taking parts apart, etc., etc. They're showing us a rabbited scenario here. Well, really not rabbited, just a reveal on the frame. What they're talking about is the back set and how to go about measuring that. And this does lead us into the installation instructions. And that's all of the service manual. So let's lead into the installation instructions, which are here. But first, this video is kind of cool. Okay, so before we get to the installation instructions, there is a video listed down below in the item itself from the manufacturer that will walk you through the process. This is an incredibly straightforward lock to put together.
And test the lock operation. These are the tools you will need. The AL lock comes in a variety of models that control how the inside and outside levers operate.
So they go through a very brief summary of all pieces mentioned. I think what we'll do is we'll just dive into the installation instructions ourselves and also touch on the template. So let's do so. Okay, now as we move to the installation instructions, and these are of course packaged with the lock, and all good installations I think start with an overview of the component in terms of what it looks like, which, you know, isn't a substitute for the steps of the installation instructions, but it does define the terms so that when you read through it and they're saying like the driver impulsor, the driver, this is obviously in different languages, the driver, you know what they're talking about. It's this thing here, F, castle nut bushing, there you go, etc. It's handy to know what they're talking about. Inside spring cage, part E. So I won't go into a discussion on how to prep the door for the lock. I think, you know, the steps to mortise a door, a wood door, or prep a hollow metal door for this lock is a different conversation. If you would like to discuss that at length, I'd be happy to. Call us with your order number, and we will. I will personally go through all of the steps. I have prepped thousands of wood doors for grade 1 and grade 2 lever locks in my career, as well as cut, welded, ground, bondoed, etc. steel doors and frames for this type of material as well. So a definition of terms, 1 and 2, we're going to skip over along with this area here. And this is just a passage set that we have here, so the discussion of cylinders won't really come into it, but over here, you do need to take the lock apart when it comes so that you can get it on the door. And there's a pin tool, a pin wrench, that you'll need to use to depress, to push in the spring-loaded retaining tab and pull the lever off like they're showing. Once you have the lever off, you'll be able to get the driver, the rose, the inside rose assembly all off the chassis. This wrench, the castle nut wrench that they're showing you here, that's included. Those used to be made of steel years ago, but they're all plastic now. Anyway, just a fun fact, I suppose, about that wrench. If you see any metal ones, you'll want to hang on to them. They're hard to come by now. The castle nut comes off. So the first thing that you're going to do when you install this lock is, so all we've done here is disassembled it out of the box. The very first thing is to get the latch bolt installed. You can do nothing else until the latch bolt is installed. What I like to do before I put the latch bolt in is I will take the exterior assembly and I'll make sure that it fits in the preparation, meaning I want to make sure that those holes have been drilled the correct size and in the correct location. Once I know that the thing fits, and I'll take that outside portion and I'll stick it on the inside face as well, just to make sure that the holes are where they need to be and are of the right size. Then the latch bolt goes in the edge of the door. Your exterior portion is going to come on, and you're going to mate the latch bolt, these tangs, to the circular chassis itself underneath the gray part retracting hub or slide. It's this T portion that will end up going inside of the slide. Okay, so you'll simultaneously slide the latch bolt down onto the chassis while you're pushing in the latch bolt a little bit to project the T portion inside of the slide receiving area. So latch is in, outside assembly goes on, then your inner rose assembly goes in with your 2 screws. Then your castle nut, here, part F, will go on down the stem, and then use your wrench to tighten it. You don't need to tighten it excessively. It'll be obvious when you should stop. At that point, once the 2 screws and the castle nut are tight on the door, test your outside operation. Make sure it works fluidly without any sort of binding. The lever returns back to where it needs to be without any trouble. Because if there's trouble at this point, there'll be trouble as you proceed. Then you're really home free. The rose goes on. Your driver goes on, which they had talked about earlier, and then that decorative cover will go on over the driver. And the only thing you need to make sure is that you align this portion of the driver opposite of where the tab is, because that portion is going to kind of sneak into the back of the lever itself. There's only one way to put the driver on, and if you try to put it on backwards, it'll be obvious it's not going in all the way. But nonetheless, this portion goes opposite of the spring tab. Now, if you have a keyed function, they talk about how to remove the cylinder. That same pin wrench you'll use in a rotation to a clockwise rotation of the cylinder with the key in it will allow you to pull that off. And then they talk about adjusting the door thickness, which we're going to do on camera here in just a moment. Of course, all of this probably should have been, up here, I would say, talking about adjusting the door thickness before putting your lock on would be a good idea. But they're really assuming 1 3/4. They're obviously assuming that, you're not going to need to change that. Before we switch back to the camera view, the next sheet is literally a template. You're going to get a paper template with the material, but this is for a wood door. Page 1, page 1 is a wood door, page 2 is a steel door. Their preparations are identical, but the drawings, of course, are different depending on what you're drilling into. This is a simple lock to prep. There is the requirement of a 2 1/8 inch hole at whatever back set you're working with. 2 3/8, 2 3/4, 3 3/4, or 5 inch. That dimension, if you follow that line, this gray line, is to the center of the thickness of the door, not to the edge at all. If it's a square edge door, then it doesn't matter, because then that line will intersect the edge of the door on either side. But with a beveled edge door, simply be mindful that your back set is truly defined from the center of the thickness back to the center of the door. What I mean is, if you measure 2 3/4 on a beveled edge door from the push side to the center line, then do so on the pull side to the center line, those holes are not going to be in alignment. So be mindful to compensate for that. Prepping this door is a 2 1/8 inch hole through the door. It is then a 5/16 hole at 12 and 6. We sell the tool for doing that, and I will show you that tool now. I think it's a M204-198. And there it is. A really great little tool. I've gotten, when you buy and own your own tools, you get a long life expectancy out of them. I have done likely hundreds of doors with a single tool. The key is you don't want to ovalize your prep when you're drilling your 5/16 hole, because that's where you'll wear the bushing out. Just in and out is all you're doing with that, and you'll get that to last a long time. It's a great little tool to go along with what you're doing. The tool goes in, and basically you mark your back set off here, top and bottom, and then you really can't get it wrong. You just drill through, not through the door. You do it from each side, okay? Halfway through on the one side, halfway through on the other side, the same way you would do the 2 1/8. You don't drill that all the way through the door at all. Then at that point, mark your 1-inch hole in the edge and drill that hole down into the set, into your 2 1/8 inch hole, your crossbore, and then mortise your edge. A router, a template, hammer and chisel, however you end up doing that. The door is probably prepped by the time you get it. If it's in a steel door and you actually have to prep that from scratch, that's going to require cutting and welding. Well, it's going to require cutting at a minimum, maybe not welding if you can rivet your mounting tabs in there, but that, of course, would not be recommended. You'd want to weld those tabs in. Now, let's switch back to the camera view and do a visual demonstration of the lock on that adjusting door thickness and wrap it up. Now, because this is a passage, there's not a lot to go over, but demonstrating the how to adjust door thickness portion is important. So this comes, and it's really simple. Schlage does a far better than average job at making it a simple, straightforward process. This is the lock. It's just a passage. There's just not much here to do with the lock. When you're going to install the lock, your pin wrench, you're going to want that. That's going to go into this stub, the access hole here for the interior lever. That you'll be able to get that pushed. That'll come off. The driver and its decorative cap. You can separate those if you want to. There's no reason to. That's the tab here that you're going to depress with the pin wrench. That's what takes the lever off. Your castle nut needs to come off. Your inside rose mounting assembly needs to come off. Inside of here are your lever return springs. Should you have a spring problem, you'll be replacing that lever, inside lever housing. The springs themselves are not serviceable. But that's the castle nut wrench. It obviously communicates to the castle nut like that. Little ridges down here is what will keep it tight. So adjusting the door thickness, you can see that the information is etched on the chassis housing itself. And where that post comes down to, the line that it lines up with is the thickness. So it's not quite 1 3/4 inches. It's a little heavy on that. It should be at 1 3/4 inches. But to adjust the thickness, you do need to take the outside part off. So because it's a passage, super easy. Same process. Pin wrench goes in, that lever will come off, and as I'm pushing, my index finger and my thumb, I'm grabbing it and pushing upwards as I'm depressing it with the pin wrench. Your driver comes off and out. Now, your castle nut is down there. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your castle wrench, stick it in there, and you'll just rotate it until it seats. Okay, it's gonna seat right into the profile preparation of that, and that's when I hear that sound, that's when I know that I've got it correct, because the ridges on the bottom of the castle nut are grinding across the same ridges on the inside of the rosette mounting assembly. Okay, those teeth there that you see. So as I rotate this counterclockwise, I draw the housing out. As I rotate it clockwise, I draw the housing in. And I believe you can see that come in and out on the camera. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to back it off till we get to that second line, which is 1 3/4 inches. Yeah, we've got it right there, 1 3/4 inches. The first line is 1 7/8 inches. So I'm right at the second line. 1 3/4 inches is right at the tip of my finger there, and that line right below it. That might be perfect. Okay. At that point, your rose stays on. Your driver goes back, and that feature is opposite of your tab. Fits in nice. The hole in the stem has to go towards the tab. Tug on that, make sure it's seated. Works well. Now your installation, lock goes, your latch bolt's in, lock goes in. Okay, I push that in a little bit to get it to come in and over. Okay, at this point, okay, your interior rose assembly, it's non-handed, it can go on either way. Well, meaning the mounting posts have to be vertical. Okay, then your castle nut will go in. You're going to want to carefully thread that on there. You just don't want to unintentionally get it started cross-threaded like I feel like I almost did. That feels good. Then your castle nut wrench. I'm obviously tightening it until I get that grinding sound. Okay, then your rose would go on, but we've got that over here. Okay, then your driver will go on. Your lever goes on. And the only thing that I've not done here is I've not installed the inner rosette, because this is going to go right back into the box to the customer. You needed those 2 screws for the inner rose assembly into these posts. That's easy as can be. You've got your 2 screws for your your latch bolt. You have 2 screws for your 4 7/8 strike, and then the other 2 screws the client won't need, because these other screws would be for a T-strike or a full or a D-strike. So we're going to put all of that back into the package along with the pin wrench, because you need the pin wrench. You know, a very small nail punch would do the job as well, but the tool is included. Latch, castle nut wrench. The last thing to show you, really, I suppose, is the strike. The overall width of this strike is about 1 inch and 13/16. That's not the size of the strike. Strikes are measured from the center of the mounting holes to the edge of the lip. It's 1 1/4 is what this is. There's a formula to determine what lip length that you need on a strike plate, and it would be considered incorrect if you didn't scrutinize what lip length your application calls for. But much of what we do in the hardware industry is already homogenized. It's already distilled to work in almost all instances. For instance, hinges that are 4.5 by 4.5 inch, standard commercial hinges, those are distilled down into being incredibly compatible. That hinge is going to work in most installations. However, it doesn't mean it's the right hinge or the best choice. Nor is 1 1/4 inch necessarily the right choice or the best choice. Okay, so you'll want to take a look at that, and that indeed is how strikes are measured. The center line of the vertical holes to the edge of the lip. 1 1/4 inch is going to be considered the standard size. Why would you want a shorter lip? Well, 1 3/16, 1 1/8, you can do those sizes, but why would you? Well, do you have an 1 3/8 door? Maybe that would be a reason why. You can get a 7/8 of an inch lip length as well. Why would you want 7/8? Well, 7/8 is 1/2 inch and 3/4. If you had a pair of hollow metal doors that you had a flat astragal applied to the pull side of the active door, and you weren't going to slot the astragal to let the lip come and sneak through that hole, that slot, you're going to need a 7/8 lip length is what you're going to need on that. Now, why might you need a lip length longer than standard 1 1/4 inch? Well, you might have a deep inset. The pull side of the door, if you ran your hand over the face of the door and frame, the door is moved in a little bit, like 3/32 of an inch, about that. It could also be flush, but that's the inset. Well, what if you had an inset of 1 inch? Now, in your mind's eye, think about the door being moved into the frame, and you need a longer length on the lip of the strike so that the latch bolt isn't hitting the casework. You can bump into that very commonly if you have a wood frame residential application. Very common thing is called a jam extension. Why is that? Well, they send out 4 9/16 deep frames to the job. Well, they need 6 inch. I don't know who made the mistake, but the walls outside are 6 inch thick. They add jam extensions. So now you have, by way of adding to the outside of the frame, a deeper inset. Okay, so you'd need a longer lip length for that. Other reasons. If you need a longer lip length, you might need wide throw hinges as well, or raised barrel hinges. Okay, so a little discussion on strike plates. That really wraps it up. We've gone over everything in the box, the parts, the documentation that's in the box. You'll get a paper template. Now, it would be considered best practice to have only the back set on the paper template for the hardware. That once upon a time you would certainly see, 2 back sets referred to. You got a 2 3/4 latch in there. This will be 2 3/4. If you switch the latch bolts out, if the client said, I need 11/088s, which are 2 3/8, yeah, you better be swapping out paper templates as well. That's just the bottom line on that. Okay. Let's take a closer look at that. Now, the template that they have here requires a little bit of scrutiny. They have this perforated edge, and when you fold that over the edge of the door, if it's an 1 3/4 thick door, that line, the intersection of the horizontal and vertical line, is going to be the center of the thickness of an 1 3/4 door, because that folded edge to the center of this hole, or that intersection, is 7/8 of an inch. But you don't fold over the template and then go to your back set. And the reason that many templates are like that, fold here, mark your edge, and then mark your back set. Well, that's not good enough. And Schlage does it good enough. And what they're doing here is, you'll notice, high bevel, low bevel, flat on bevel. So what they're saying is, as we talked earlier, if it's a square edge door, it doesn't matter from where you go back 2 3/4 to, but if it's a beveled edge door, now the game's going to change. So this template will work for beveled edge or square edge doors, but you can't fold that over because you have 3 possibilities of reference point on the template, and those will possibly be different depending on the side of the door you're standing on. So line up your edge accordingly. If you're measuring on the high side, go to the high line. If you're on a square edge door, go to the middle, because that's truly 2 3/4. This line here, back here, is 2 3/4. But the low bevel, obviously, that's going to be less than 2 3/4. The high bevel will be, of course, greater than 2 3/4. So their template is different than those in the past where you literally will fold it over the edge and mark your holes. That's no good. If they had a way to make the template rigidly an L, and that L terminated at the center of the thickness of the door, and you weren't changing that 90-degree angle, the trouble with that is you can't really translate that from high side to low side very easily. Is just simply the bottom line. There are lots of installation aids for installing doors made by a variety of locksmith supply manufacturers, and if you do enough of these, you might invest in such a tool. I never did. I would either do it by hand with some relatively basic hand tools that were still very quick. Doing doors by hand, I can in 1 hour, I can prep 3 doors, undercutting it in height, beveling both styles, 3 hinges, and a cylindrical lock prep. And that's just going at a standard pace. I've also been involved with CNC equipment where we've prepped, a couple hundred doors in a shift, or in a morning, quite frankly, where it's, everything's much more automated. So how you go about getting the right dimension is up to you, but just be mindful that back set's a little more complicated because of the potential for bevel. And the edges can be rabbited, as we talked about earlier. They can also be radiused. So you won't install this on a radius edge door, but be mindful back set's measured from the center of the thickness. Below this video is a link to the manufacturer's page I had talked about earlier. Let's switch back to the screen view. Okay, so we had talked about this link to the manufacturer's page, and I wanted to bring it to your attention. This link will show you not only all of the Schlage products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. But on this page are other encyclopedic documents, such as the entire service manual, the entire template index, very helpful documents. Also, this Key Blanks Quick Reference Guide is a very handy document to be able to look at when you want to pull up the part number of a key blank. If you need a 6-pin classic key blank, it's really nice to be able to look at this document and to find that part number of the key blank. It's just a 35-101 is that part number. That's here somewhere. Yeah, right there. The conventional 35101 6-pin key blank. So that's really a handy reference guide to look at all of their key blanks. Then there are technical manuals here, such as the Primus service manual, if you're working on Primus cylinders. The SL manual is here as well. The guide to Schlage padlocks is here. The Everest service manual is here, if I haven't already said that. It's here somewhere. There it is. Everest service manual. Lots of neat documentation here. Also, those older catalogs I may have mentioned in the past. Okay, archival documents for your reference. Let's finish up this video on camera. Okay, in conclusion, I'm very partial to Schlage, unapologetically. I'm a fan of their product line. I'm a fan of, the fact that the material is generally kept in stock, even the parts. And I'm especially a fan of their exceptional technical support department, just exceptional across the board. And I'm probably partial to them also because it was the first lock line, and probably so for many people who work in the door hardware industry, the first lock line that you end up being exposed to. Why is that? Well, Schlage is everywhere. That's why. My career being mostly spent in Chicago, Schlage is everywhere. Like it is in San Francisco, which is where Schlage, got its start. And then at some point, maybe in the 90s, they moved to Colorado. And I don't know what still goes. I believe everything still goes on there. Their tech support may be located in Indianapolis. I'm not positive. Doesn't really matter. I get great service out of every time that I contact their technical support department. So the decision of what lock you should buy isn't what is the cost. What is my I'm going to walk out of the store with this lock. What's the cost? The cost is the lifespan of the lock. When they're giving you the published service manual and telling you what the part numbers are, so that if you have a $20 part that breaks on a $200 lock, what's the cost? That first lock's $100. You're buying another lock because you can't get the $20 part. Now you're at $200 immediately. Different preparations, other complications like that. And when they take that published documentation and back it up with exceptional technical support, it's the entire lifespan of the lock that should be looked at. Any questions on the Schlage AL10 or any other AL series lock or any Schlage product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.